you need to watch this video until the very end, because what you are about to discover will change how you see your phone forever. By the time we reach the final words, you'll understand the invisible prison you've been living in, and more importantly, you'll know exactly how to escape it. Stay with me through every second of this journey, because the wisdom waiting at the end could save your mind from drowning in digital darkness. There is a moment that happens every single morning across the world. Eyes open. Consciousness returns. However, before your feet touch the floor, your hand reaches for something cold. Your phone. The screen illuminates your face in the pre-dawn darkness. You begin to scroll. One headline bleeds into another. Disaster, tragedy, outrage, catastrophe. Your thumb moves automatically, mechanically, as if possessed by something beyond your conscious control. You tell yourself you are just checking what is happening. But 3 hours later, you are still there, still scrolling, still consuming, still drowning. This is doom scrolling. However, it is not just a harmless habit or a minor quirk of modern existence. It is a psychological trap that millions fall into every single day without realizing they're trapped. The walls are invisible, the chains are made of light, but the prison is absolutely real. Let me take you back to a specific moment in human history. March 2020. The world stopped spinning in the way we'd always known it. COVID-19 swept across continents like a shadow consuming sunlight. People locked themselves inside their homes, cut off from the physical world they'd always taken for granted. However, they weren't truly alone. They had their screens, they had their feeds, they had an endless stream of information pouring in. The pandemic didn't just change where we lived, it changed how we lived. Our phones became what researchers called the primary and addictive lifeline for society during this period. Think about those words for a moment. Lifeline, addictive. We needed our devices to survive, yet they were simultaneously destroying us from the inside out. This is when doom scrolling emerged from the shadows and became a defining behavior of our generation. But here's what most people don't understand about doom scrolling. It didn't begin with the pandemic. The pandemic simply exposed what was always lurking beneath the surface of our digital existence. A vulnerability, a wound, a desperate hunger. The term doom scrolling was first used in 2018 by someone named Ashik Siddiq. However, the behavior itself is ancient. It connects to something called mean world syndrome from the 1970s. Back then, researchers discovered that people who watched violent television content began believing the world was far more dangerous than it actually was. Their perception of reality became warped by the filter of media they consumed. Sound familiar? Doom scrolling is mean world syndrome on steroids, amplified by algorithms that know your psychological vulnerabilities better than you do. But why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we voluntarily consume content that makes us feel anxious, depressed, and terrified? The answer lies deep within the architecture of your brain, in systems that evolved millions of years ago. Let me explain. Your brain has a part called the amygdala. It sits in your limbic system, the ancient core that controls your most primal instincts. The amygdala is your survival alarm. It is constantly scanning for threats, searching for danger, preparing you to fight or flee. In prehistoric times, this system kept your ancestors alive. It made them notice the shadow that might be a predator. It made them hear the rustling that might signal an attack. It kept them hypervigilant in a world where death could arrive at any moment. However, here is the problem with living in the modern world with an ancient brain. Your amygdala can't distinguish between a real physical threat and a digital representation of danger. When you see a news headline about a mass shooting, your amygdala responds. When you scroll past an article about climate collapse, your amygdala responds. When you watch a video of violence or suffering, your amygdala responds. It floods your system with stress hormones. It triggers your fight or flight response. It tells your body that you are in immediate danger, even though you are sitting safely on your couch. This is why doom scrolling feels so compulsive, so impossible to stop. Your ancient survival system is convinced it is keeping you safe by forcing you to scan for threats. But in reality, it is drowning you in an ocean of manufactured anxiety. Scientists have discovered something fascinating and terrifying about how our brains process negative information. There is a structure called the inferior frontal gyrus that acts as a filter for bad news. Under normal circumstances, this filter protects you from being overwhelmed. It helps you maintain an optimistic bias, a belief that things will generally be okay. However, when you engage in chronic doom scrolling, something catastrophic happens. Your brain perceives itself as being under constant threat. In response, it shuts off the bad news filter. Suddenly, Every piece of negative information gets through, without any buffering or protection. Your beliefs about reality begin to update based purely on the worst possible interpretation of events. Researchers tested this by using transcranial magnetic stimulation to temporarily disrupt the inferior frontal gyrus. When they did this, people became significantly more likely to incorporate negative information into their worldview. They lost their ability to discount bad news and embrace good news. This is exactly what doom scrolling does to your brain, except you are doing it to yourself voluntarily. You are literally breaking your own psychological defense mechanisms by feeding yourself an endless stream of digital darkness. Let me introduce you to another piece of this psychological puzzle. It is called negativity bias. Negativity bias is the scientific fact that negative events affect your mental well-being far more powerfully than positive ones. One bad thing happening has a greater psychological impact than 10 good things happening. This isn't a character flaw or a sign of weakness. It is hardwired into your neural architecture because, again, your ancestors needed to remember threats more vividly than rewards. Missing out on a meal was unfortunate, but missing the signs of a predator was fatal. Your brain evolved to weight negative information more heavily because it was literally a matter of life or death. However, social media algorithms have discovered this vulnerability and weaponized it against you. They've learned that negative content generates more engagement, more clicks, more time spent scrolling, so they feed you exactly what your amygdala is searching for: threats, dangers, catastrophes, and tragedies. The algorithm gives you what your ancient brain craves, but what your modern mind desperately needs to avoid. This creates what psychologists call a self-perpetuating cycle. You see upsetting news. You want more information about the upsetting news because your brain thinks this will help. So you keep scrolling. You find more upsetting news. The cycle repeats. Endlessly, automatically, compulsively. There is another force driving your doom scrolling behavior. It is called FOMO, fear of missing out. This fear is particularly insidious because it disguises itself as responsible behavior. You tell yourself you are just staying informed. You convince yourself that being aware of current events is important. But underneath this rational justification, there is a deeper anxiety gnawing at your consciousness. What if something important happens and you don't know about it? What if there is a development in the news and you are caught unaware? What if everyone else knows something you don't? Studies have found that more than half of Americans experience FOMO on social media. In Italy, it affects 67% of users. Among Polish teenagers, the number reaches 59%. This fear creates a psychological compulsion to constantly check, refresh, update, and scroll. You are not really looking for information anymore. You are trying to quiet the anxiety that comes from imagining yourself as disconnected and uninformed. However, here is the cruel irony. The more you doom scroll to avoid missing out, the more you actually miss out on real life. The hours you spend scrolling are hours stolen from genuine experiences, meaningful relationships, and authentic presence. You are sacrificing your actual life in a desperate attempt to stay connected to a digital simulation of life. Let me show you something even deeper beneath the surface of this behavior. Something darker, something more primal. Doom scrolling isn't just about fear or anxiety, it is about control, or rather the desperate illusion of control in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and unpredictable. When everything feels like it is falling apart, when the future seems uncertain and terrifying, we grasp for anything that might give us a sense of mastery over our circumstances. We convince ourselves that if we just consume enough information, we'll somehow be prepared. If we just stay updated on every development, we'll be able to protect ourselves. If we just keep scrolling, we'll eventually find the piece of information that makes everything make sense. But this is a lie we tell ourselves, a comforting delusion that keeps us trapped. Information isn't power when it is information you can't act upon. Reading about disasters you can't prevent doesn't make you safer. It just makes you more anxious. A 2022 study found that people who engaged in high levels of problematic news consumption had worse outcomes. They weren't more prepared or more protected, they were just more damaged. Now let me show you what all of this actually does to your body and mind. The physical effects of doom scrolling are surprisingly concrete and measurable. Headaches that pulse behind your eyes like drum beats, muscle tension that turns your shoulders into stone, neck pain that radiates down your spine, nausea that churns in your stomach without relief, difficulty sleeping, even when exhaustion weighs you down like gravity, elevated blood pressure that puts constant stress on your cardiovascular system. These aren't abstract psychological concepts, they're real physical consequences happening in your actual body right now. But the mental health effects cut even deeper. Anxiety that sits on your chest like a weight you can't remove. Depression that colors everything in shades of gray. A feeling of existential dread that makes you question the meaning of everything. Catastrophic thinking where every problem becomes an insurmountable disaster. isolation that separates you from the people who actually care about you, a sense of helplessness that makes you feel small and powerless against forces beyond your control. Studies have shown that just 3 minutes of negative news in the morning makes you 27% more likely to report having a bad day 6 to 8 hours later. 3 minutes. That is all it takes to poison your entire day. Now imagine what hours of doom scrolling does to your entire life. There is a concept in psychology called popcorn brain. It is the real biological phenomenon of feeling like your brain is literally popping because you are being overstimulated online. Your neural circuits start firing in rapid, scattered patterns that mirror the chaotic flow of your social media feed. You become unable to focus on anything that moves at the slower pace of real life. Conversations feel boring, books feel impossible. Sitting with your thoughts becomes physically uncomfortable. You've trained your brain to expect constant stimulation, constant novelty, constant emotional intensity. However, real life doesn't work that way. Real life requires patience, attention, depth, and sustained focus. When you've got popcorn brain, you've lost the ability to engage with reality on its own terms. You are like a drug addict who can no longer feel pleasure from normal activities because you've fried your dopamine receptors with constant artificial stimulation. This is what the infinite scroll was designed to do to you. Let me tell you about a man named Asa Raskin. He is the person who invented infinite scrolling, the feature that removes natural stopping points from your digital experience. Before infinite scroll, websites had pages. You'd reach the bottom and have to make a conscious choice to click. That moment of choice was a natural pause, a chance to ask yourself if you really wanted to continue. But Raskin eliminated that pause. He created a feature where content loads continuously and endlessly as you scroll down. No barriers, no stopping points, no moments of conscious choice. Just an endless stream of information flowing directly into your brain without interruption. Years later, Raskin expressed deep regret about his invention. He described it as one of the first products designed to not simply help a user, but to deliberately keep them online for as long as possible. He created a psychological trap disguised as a convenience. However, by the time he recognized what he'd done, infinite scrolling had become the standard for virtually every social media platform on Earth. Billions of people trapped in an infinite loop, scrolling endlessly through content that makes them feel worse. But here is what makes doom scrolling truly diabolical. The social media companies know exactly what they're doing. Their entire business model depends on keeping you engaged, keeping you scrolling, keeping you trapped on their platforms. The longer you scroll, the more advertisements they can show you, the more data they can collect about your behavior, preferences, fears, and desires. The more money they make. So they've designed algorithms that prioritize emotionally stimulating content, particularly negative and sensationalized content that triggers your amygdala. They've discovered that anger, fear, and outrage are the most powerful emotions for driving engagement. So that is what they feed you. Not because it is true, not because it is important, not because it is helpful, but because it keeps you scrolling. The algorithm doesn't care about your mental health. It doesn't care about your well-being. It doesn't care about your happiness. It only cares about engagement metrics and advertising revenue. You are not the customer of these platforms. You are the product being sold to advertisers. Your attention is being harvested, packaged, and monetized by companies that have mastered the art of psychological manipulation. Let me show you who is most vulnerable to this digital trap. Research indicates that doom scrolling is more common among males, younger age groups, and people who actively follow political events. But two groups are especially at risk for severe psychological damage: women and people with a history of trauma. Women are hit harder because, as one Harvard psychiatrist noted, most violent media content is about hurting women and children. Every headline about violence triggers a personal sense of vulnerability and fear. People with trauma histories doom scroll out of a desperate need to feel safe in a world that has already proven itself dangerous. They're scanning for threats because their nervous system learned long ago that danger can strike at any moment. However, the cruel paradox is that doom scrolling doesn't make them feel safer. It triggers their trauma responses, reactivating the very wounds they're trying to protect. It is like a person who has been burned repeatedly sticking their hand back into the fire, hoping that this time the flames won't hurt. Now, let me show you something even more disturbing. There is a growing phenomenon called news avoidance. People are starting to cope with the overwhelming negativity of modern media by simply unplugging completely. In 2017, 29% of people reported actively avoiding the news. By 2022, that number had risen to 38%. In 2023, it reached 39% globally. At first, this might sound like a healthy response to toxic media environments, but scholars suggest something more complex is happening. They describe doom scrolling and news avoidance as divergent effects of the same underlying problem. Both behaviors are driven by the same media environment of repetitive, negative, overwhelming information. Some people respond by consuming compulsively, others respond by completely withdrawing. But both responses represent a breakdown in our healthy relationship with information. We're either drowning in it or running from it. We've lost the ability to engage with news in a balanced, measured, psychologically sustainable way. So how do you escape this trap? How do you break free from the invisible prison of doom scrolling? The first thing you need to understand is that this isn't about willpower or discipline. You are not weak because you struggle to stop scrolling. You are fighting against systems specifically engineered by some of the smartest behavioral psychologists in the world to be as addictive as possible. You are fighting against your own evolutionary programming that was designed for a completely different environment. You are fighting against business models worth hundreds of billions of dollars. However, you can still win this fight if you approach it strategically. Let me give you the most powerful intervention you can make starting tonight. Keep your phone off your nightstand. I know this sounds absurdly simple, but it is the biggest game changer. When you wake up, instead of immediately reaching for your phone, you acclimate yourself to the actual world. You see the light coming through your window. You notice the person sleeping next to you. You feel your own body and breath. You create a buffer between your consciousness and the digital flood. This single change can transform your entire relationship with your device. But there is more you need to do. Keep your phone physically distant from your body during work hours. Put it in a drawer. Place it 10 feet away from your desk. Make it inconvenient to reach. Don't bring your phone to the dinner table. Leave it more than an arm's length away and set it to silent. Switch your phone display to grayscale mode, removing the saturation and color that makes scrolling visually enticing. Opt out of every single notification possible. Those beeps and dings are designed to hijack your attention. Focus on local community news instead of global catastrophes. You can't influence. Tell people who share depressing or violent content with you that you are not interested. This puts you back in control of what enters your consciousness. Volunteer at organizations where you can take concrete action instead of passive consumption. Talk to your doctor if you find you literally cannot stop scrolling despite your best efforts. Some people need professional intervention to break free from this addiction. There is no shame in asking for help, but here is what I really want you to understand beneath all these practical strategies. Doom scrolling is a symptom of something deeper than just phone addiction or poor self-control. It is a symptom of existential anxiety in a world that feels increasingly unstable and threatening. It is a symptom of profound disconnection from meaningful community and purpose. It is a symptom of a society that has replaced genuine human connection with digital simulation. When you compulsively scroll through bad news, you are trying to fill a void that can't be filled with information. You are searching for something that social media can never provide. You are looking for safety, certainty, control, and meaning in a place specifically designed to keep you feeling unsafe, uncertain, powerless, and empty. The algorithm knows that satisfied people don't scroll, content people don't engage, people who feel fulfilled don't spend hours trapped in infinite loops of digital consumption. So the system is designed to keep you perpetually unsatisfied, always searching, never finding. The path to freedom starts with a simple but profound realization. You don't need to know everything that is happening in the world at every moment. You don't need to be constantly updated on every disaster, tragedy, and catastrophe. You don't need to carry the weight of global suffering on your shoulders. This isn't selfishness or ignorance. It is psychological self-preservation. It is recognizing that you are a finite being with limited emotional capacity, living in an age of infinite information. Your mind was never designed to hold the collective suffering of the entire world. Your nervous system was never meant to process thousands of potential threats. Per Dalton Y. Your attention was never meant to be split across hundreds of simultaneous stimuli. When you try to do these things, you don't become more informed or more compassionate. You just become more anxious, more depressed, more helpless, and more disconnected from the real people and real experiences in your actual life. Let me leave you with something to carry with you. Every moment you spend doom scrolling is a moment stolen from your real life. Every hour you spend trapped in the infinite scroll is an hour you could have spent creating something meaningful. Every day you spend consuming manufactured anxiety is a day you could have spent cultivating genuine peace. Your attention is the most valuable resource you possess. It is more valuable than money because you can always make more money, but you can never make more time. The companies that profit from your doom scrolling know this. They're mining your attention like a natural resource, extracting your consciousness, and converting it into advertising revenue. But you have the power to take back your attention, to reclaim your consciousness, to break free from the digital prison. It won't be easy. The first few days will feel uncomfortable. anxious, maybe even painful. You'll feel the compulsion to check your phone like a physical itch you can't scratch. But on the other side of that discomfort is something precious. Freedom, presence, peace. The ability to engage with reality on its own terms, instead of through a screen designed to manipulate your emotions. So here's my final question for you. Who are you when you are not scrolling? What emerges in the space where doom scrolling used to live? What version of yourself have you been sacrificing at the altar of infinite content? And are you ready to meet that person again?